Packer fans know Aaron Rodgers is himself a beautiful mystery. Ian O'Connor wrote the book about him. No, literally. He joins us on the show today.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you'll find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. Ian O'Connor wrote a great book about Aaron Rodgers. Yes, I read the book. It's a terrific book. And for Packer fans, it's going to be rehashing some things that maybe they don't want to rehash. And there's a lot of new information in here, and a lot of information you've probably heard about, referencing to reporting that has already been out there from people like Ty Dunn, who's been on this program. But I have a great time talking with Ian, and we have plenty to talk about. So let's not waste any time, and let's get right to it. Joining me now, the author of Out of the Darkness, The Mystery of Aaron Rodgers, longtime sports writer, multi-time biographer, Ian O'Connor. Ian, it is wonderful to be with you. Thanks for taking the time. I told you just before we came on, I ripped through this book. It's an easy read to you just kind of want to keep turning the page. What's next? What's going to come next? And that mirrors in a lot of ways the experience of watching Aaron Rodgers over the last 15 years evolve as a person. You weren't in Green Bay every day over the course of his career. You got to see him from afar. So before you dove into the reporting of this, what was your perception of Aaron Rodgers? What made him such an interesting figure to you?
Well, first off, I always had a fascination with the Green Bay Packers because Vince Lombardi coached at my high school. The only head coaching job he ever had with the Packers was at my high school, St. Cecilia's in Englewood, New Jersey. And having played on that football team, the legacy of Lombardi was always there, believe it or not, all those years later. But from a distance, I felt that Aaron was a mysterious figure. I thought he was, from a distance, the best interview, at least at the podium in the NFL. I always found him to be candid, thoughtful, engaging. You may not agree with everything he's saying up there, but he spoke in long form answers. I really appreciated that. No cliches. And we want people to be honest. Tell us your truth. And he did that consistently, at least from my perspective in watching from across the country effectively. But I actually was under contract to do a biography of LeBron James, and then another book on LeBron came out, and I thought there might be some LeBron fatigue. And all of a sudden, at the same time, Aaron got traded into my backyard in New York. And I thought, this is the most polarizing player in the NFL. He might be the most famous American male athlete who does not have a defining biography written about him.
Yeah.
That I thought. And so let's make a trade, LeBron for Aaron Rodgers. And 4 snaps in last year on 9/11, I didn't know if that was the greatest trade in the world. But now last season becomes this year. Let's hope he stays healthy, gets 14, 15 starts, and the Jets can actually benefit from the deal. And I think people in New York really just want to see him play. And that's what I really missed last year is I just want every week to be able to watch a great play, that position. And we were robbed of that. And hopefully that won't happen again.
Yeah, I'm actually fascinated about how, if you do a paperback in 5 years, what changes, what you can add, because this story is not over. I think that's what makes this such a fascinating time to do this because, right, we're waiting on what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. Now, the Packers are all set. It looks like you have a first ballot Hall of Famer again. It's amazing, 3 in a row, who's going to be great for 15 years. So I understand that Packer fans with Aaron Rodgers in New York, some still care and they're interested. But I think nationally, he's still the most talked about player in the league, I think. And even though Mahomes is going for a three-peat, I think Aaron Rodgers generates more copy, and it's an old school term, and is such a content machine like nobody else in the league. It's amazing. So no, it's and if he wins a ring, his second ring in New York at the end of his career, you look at what a second ring did for Peyton Manning at the end, even though he wasn't the same player. John Elway won both of his rings at the end of his career. If he wins one for the iconic Green Bay Packers and really America's team, and wins a second one for a New York franchise that hasn't been to the Super Bowl since January of 1969, what that's going to do for his historical standing in the sport is off the charts. So do I think it's going to happen? No, I do think the Jets will go 11-6 and make the playoffs and maybe make a run, probably fall short. But I just want him to be healthy for 14 or 15 starts.
I think even Packer fans who were ready to see him leave in Green Bay feel the same way. No one wants to see an all-time great end his career battling injuries and just going, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. That would be a bummer. I think, again, even for Packer fans who are like, I'm really excited about Jordan Love, and they are. There's so many great anecdotes in here in the book. When you went out to start reporting it, what was the thing you wanted to dig into the most, where you felt like, hey, I can provide insight into this thing that maybe people don't understand? Because what I find interesting, Ian, is I believe previous to you reporting the book, you had the anecdote about Tom Brady being like, Aaron doesn't even know how good he would be in this offense. Can you give us a little insight into that nugget? Because that had sort of been floating out there. That makes it into the book, but it was something that you had heard years before.
Yeah, I wrote that for ESPN.com. And Tom Brady said that to an NFL head coach. And I think he's somewhat denied it. But I know exactly where he was when he said it and what day it was, what time of day.
Yeah,
and
you got the reporting cold.
Who he said it to. And he didn't literally mean 7,000 yards a season. But the point was that Aaron is so much more talented than I am. If he had Josh McDaniels as an offensive coordinator, this system, and the greatest head coach of all time, how many rings would this guy have? He wouldn't have one. I can guarantee you that. And Mike McCarthy was a better than average, slightly better than average head coach, not a bad head coach. And he won a Super Bowl. You can't take that away from him. LaFleur, same thing. I'd put him in that same category. Not a great head coach, certainly not a bad head coach, and probably has a chance to be very good. But I think it's hard to believe when I go back and look at tape, and I looked at so much old film or video of Aaron Rodgers playing in his prime. I just can't believe that the Packers didn't win more than one championship with this guy. You cannot play the position at a higher level than he did for much of his prime. And so I still shake my head over that and think of the 2014 NFC Championship game.
Yes.
And all the things that had to go wrong in those final 5 minutes.
You're preaching to the converted on this show, because, you know, Packer fans feel the same way, that there's just no way. If you play Aaron Rodgers' career 100 times, this might be the worst outcome in terms of number of rings that he would have. I mean, it really does feel that way. More to come with Ian O'Connor next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Save up to 60% when you buy last minute with Game Time, with sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And with all-in prices, you know up front the number that you're going to pay. No hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets or any tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. For your second listen, enjoy Locked On Fantasy Football. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There was also this evolution of him personally, professionally. Like if you go back and you see some of the clips of him from 2009, 2010, there's hints of the personality that we ultimately see, but he was a much more reserved guy, someone who in the media did not want to spend time, going on extra shows, doing Pat McAfee. Like 2010 Aaron Rodgers would never have done that, but 2010 Aaron Rodgers was a different Aaron Rodgers. When you go out and you report this, you said something that I thought was fascinating in a different interview where you said, maybe it was even a tweet where you said you dug into his history and his parents and his grandparents. And there's some fascinating stuff in the book about, his grandfather in particular.
Right.
And you said it made you understand him more. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think just let me start with his grandfather, because anytime you get a chance to write about one of the greatest members of the greatest generation, you take it. Yeah. And his grandfather was he was referencing stories as a World War II veteran. He was far more than that. He flew 44 combat missions against the Hitler war machine, 43 of them successful. He was shot down on the 44th, captured, beaten, and taken as a POW, mistreated. But on St. Patrick's Day in 1944, his plane's on fire, bullet-ridden. He's got 10 crew members aboard, and the rest of his squadron peeled off. They didn't abandon him, but that was just protocol, the next stage of the mission they were onto. And he said, I was all alone over Nazi Germany. It was the loneliest feeling in the world. But somehow he got that plane on fire back to the American base in Italy. Also went on mission 44 when he was shot down. As he was going down, he made sure to take his plane away from other American planes in case his blew up. He didn't want to kill somebody in another plane. So the guy was an amazing American hero. And just his valor, his heroism. But Aaron's parents said they thought that just the poise and, I mean, listen, you can't compare football to combat. I guess in a sense, it's the closest thing we have. It's simulated combat on TV, but you just can't compare anything to war. So I don't want to do that. But I will say this, parents said that they thought that something like that, poise under pressure, is passed down through the generations. Sure. And so that connection is made. I think, listen, the estrangement now going on 10 years is something that needs to end. And that's clear. But his father was his hero. He would talk about Joe Montana and Steve Young as his heroes because he was a big Niners fan growing up. But really, he idolized his father. He wanted to be his father. His father was a very good Division II college football lineman who had Division I talent. He was overlooked like Aaron was coming out of high school later on. So I think there's a lot of his father in Aaron, and that's why they reconnected last summer at Lake Tahoe. And I feel like the road to reconciliation does run through the man who he called his idol and was his best friend at a time. And I think that when they do come together permanently, I'm hoping that happens sooner rather than later, the rest of the family will come together in an organic way. At least that's my hope.
Yeah. There's plenty of stuff on the family estrangement in the book. It's not a road that I want to go down a ton on this show. Fine. Yeah. But I do think it's interesting.
If I could say, Peter, I had less interest in writing about the family than anything else. I mean, chapter one.
It's the thing that's going to sell you books, though. You understand that. Like, people are going to want to read about it.
Yeah,
in no uncertain terms.
I'm part of the excerpt process. I'm not running away from that responsibility. I do get it. This is my 6th book, and I knew that was going to hop out of this book. Mm-hmm. But I was more interested in writing about his grandfather. And that's why it's chapter 1, because I wanted to start with a positive story about the Rodgers family because so much negativity has surrounded it for nearly a decade. And
you have the note in there that his parents were actually at the game. I don't think that was public knowledge. I certainly didn't know that his parents were there in week 1 on 9/11 for his debut as a New York Jet.
I drove them to the game.
Right.
Yeah. And I told Aaron, I said, I want you to know this. I told him after the fact, I took your parents to the game and I explained how that played out. And he said, okay. And he knew they were there, the Jet, because the parents had to buy the tickets through the Jets because they couldn't get them from their son. They haven't talked to him in 9 years at that point. So he knew. I think the Jets went to Aaron and said, are you okay with them being in the building? And he said, yes. So anyway, one thing I appreciate, and then we'll get off the subject. about Aaron is that I said, do you understand? Because we can debate this. As a biographer, I have no choice but to write about this. It's 10 years of your life.
Right.
And he said, I understand. Like, you couldn't write the story of my life without including this, because I really didn't want to include it, to be honest with you. But he understood that I had no choice but to delve into it. And the rest of it is what it is.
Yeah. Look, I'm not going to lie and say I didn't find it fascinating. I was, like I said, I ripped through it. I devoured all the information in there. There was some excellent reporting in there. What I also find interesting, and you frame this in the book, and I've also heard you frame it in some other interviews, that when you were talking to him, it seems like you had some back and forths where you're almost like not playing therapist, but you're sort of offering your perspective on some of this stuff. And I thought that's an interesting tact to take. And I'm wondering why you handled it that way. I'm not in a critical way at all. I'm just curious, because it is, to me, it stood out as an interesting way to just approach talking to Rodgers.
Yeah, I'm certainly not qualified to be anybody's therapist. Family counselor. I come from a big Irish Catholic family. We've had our issues too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think tell him that at some point. But I thought I just wanted to connect with him. And obviously you do that with a subject. You try to make people comfortable so they trust you, talk to you in a way that maybe they otherwise wouldn't if they're being recorded. By the way, I had my phone out and another taping device. And I said, if you ever want me to turn these off, just tell me. He never asked me to turn them off. He actually, at one point, the sun was beating down on my recording devices, and he put his giant hands over them and said, hey, we need to protect these. Let's slide them under the chair into the shade. And so I appreciated that. But
he didn't do the Mina Kimes thing where he put his own phone down to make sure that everything you said was...
He might have taped it. I didn't see a device, and certainly he had a right to tape it if he wanted to. But I don't know if he did or not. He didn't do it in front of me. But I certainly didn't want to try to act as an intermediary between him and his family. But I don't know. I thought that I wanted to say to him about because this changed his life publicly, was I've been immunized. Obviously, that line in August of 21. And I wanted to say, listen, I've thought about this a lot. I was vaccinated. But I feel like if I were working for a Milwaukee or Green Bay outlet and I was sitting in that room, and you said your truth, which was he was allergic to an ingredient in Moderna and Pfizer and concerned about Johnson & Johnson side effects, I would have found that to be a somewhat reasonable position to have. And I don't think I would have ripped you in a column that day.
Yeah.
But so why didn't you tell the truth? Because you would have gotten half the criticism, less than half the criticism you ended up getting in November when the truth came out. And I was surprised that he admitted that it was a mistake. And if he had a mulligan on it, that he would tell his truth. So, because Aaron Rodgers doesn't.
Well, can you explain why too? Because that was new information to me. That part of the reason why he said it the way that he did was specifically because he was fighting this battle to insist that what he had, the therapeutic that he had undergone, should count, and that's why he phrased it that way. That at least from his perspective, it wasn't to be evasive. Your mileage on that can vary, right? But that it was based on he's trying to make the case that he should actually get to say that this counts.
Right. And the holistic treatment program he went through, he thought qualified him to be vaccinated. And if he basically, it was odd reasoning. Like, if I admit this, that's going to hurt my appeal. And yet he said at the same time, if somebody asked a follow-up question about whether or not you're vaccinated, he was going to tell the truth then. So I feel like it was a case of a very smart guy, 1310 on his SATs, better than I got. He outsmarted himself. Like, instead of playing those games and waiting, if the second question is not asked, I'm not going to deliver the information, my truth. I'm going to play this game in the media. It burned him. He has not recovered from that PR hit. And that's the day he became a villain in the NFL, because before that, as you know, Peter, he was considered one of the good guys in the NFL, I thought anyway. His social positions,
You're right,
supporting Kaepernick and other things, he was known as one of those guys. So even though you have the conspiracy theories and the Kimmel thing on top of the vaccine thing, that's the day that his public life changed.
We finish up with Ian O'Connor next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively looking for a new role, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. To post your job for free, terms and conditions do apply. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. What was his perspective, such that he was willing to give it on what happened in the spring of 2021 when there was this whole, Aaron doesn't want to, the reporting from Adam Schefter. There's a great line in there about Brian Gutekunst telling someone, well, at least Adam got a response on the lose my number thing. I laughed out loud when I read that. And then also what happened this past off season, because that was something where I was like, I would have loved some more color in there. And I wonder again, why can't I think of it? I just used it. When you make the paperback in 5 years, that there might be more information that you're able to get from Packer sources and Jet sources that might be a little bit more willing to talk about those situations. But what was his perspective on those?
The paperback usually comes in a year. So I think we're going to publish that a year from now. So hopefully I'll get an opportunity to add context to some of the things you're talking about. But I'll be really honest here. When I arrived,
not a criticism, by the way. I just want to be clear about that. I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I arrived at his house in February, I had already handed in the book in January. That's when it was due. And I told him that. I said, by the way, the first draft of the manuscript was done because I was requesting him constantly through the season, through the Jets, through his agent, directly to him. I sent him books I had written on Belichick and Coach K and getting really nothing. And I thought, okay, well, this is a book, another one that is going to have no cooperation. And then suddenly I get a message from the Jets in February. He's now willing to see you. So we had to tear open the book, and there were questions. There was no time constraint or limit. I had no idea if after a half hour he didn't like the line of questioning that he could toss me out of there. It wasn't like we set on 2 hours. I thought I might only get 40 minutes. So I had to prioritize what I was going to ask him. The family stuff had to be a big part of it because I knew that was going to be the most sensitive material in the book. So I didn't get a chance to ask him about his feelings at the end in Green Bay. I do have some information on the book about the offseason and the way it played out because
there's some reporting in there for sure.
He had a body coach basically who effectively moved in with him, and Aaron Alexander is his name. And he said to me that there were times when it was really dark, it was grim, and Aaron thought, not only am I done as a player, but the Jets probably don't even want me back. He thought he had let everyone down, and it was really grim, and he emphasized it. So he said it took a lot for Aaron to get past that, and then he did. And now all of a sudden his recovery physically was going to so great that he said, I want to play this season. Aaron Alexander says, no, we're not doing that. He said, because you rushed this Achilles thing, and I've seen it before, you're going to tear it again, and then basically your career is over. Let's wait to 2024 and try to win a Super Bowl with the Jets that year. Aaron says, no, I'm doing it. So in December, he says, if the Jets win the December 17th game at Miami, I am playing Christmas Eve against Washington. And, of course, the Jets got blown out 30-0.
Yeah.
They're the Jets. So he was going to play. That was not a publicity stunt. I know that's been suggested. And Aaron wanted to stay in the news and create another news cycle every other day. That was legitimate. He was planning on playing against Washington on Christmas Eve, but the Jets had to get him there. And, of course, they couldn't do it.
Do you think physically he would have been able to do that? Like, I know that's Aaron's perspective, but do you think the Jets would have said, yeah, sure, go out there?
I think because the Jets had turned over their franchise to him in some regard, they would have allowed him to do it. Now, he said, I was going to play in a small circle. There couldn't be any scrambling. And I think if there was a sure sack, he'd just go down. There had to be some serious conversations about how are we going to play this out here. But it would have been probably the greatest medical comeback in NFL history.
Yeah, it would have been.
And if Aaron could somehow salvage something out of it, just horrible season with a very positive at the end in 2023, I think the Jets would have allowed it. I do.
So the last thing I want to ask you is, okay, so you came into the reporting with some ideas about Aaron Rodgers and certainly already some reporting in your back pocket on Aaron Rodgers. You go through the reporting, then you get to talk to him. What struck you? What stood out? What did you feel like you learned that maybe you hadn't gleaned about Aaron Rodgers, the person, not necessarily like specific bits of reporting, after having had this conversation and going through this whole process?
I don't know if I learned a ton about him as a person. It's just really more on some of the positions, and particularly, again, the family.
Yeah.
And he provided some context on the record. There were some things that he didn't want to talk about for public consumption, some things I knew about. But I just always thought of him as a fascinating, engaging, candid person. And he was all of that in those 2 hours. Like, even talking about the vaccine, I was surprised he admitted, basically, I made a mistake, because the true greats I've written about and profiled in books never want to admit weakness in any form or fashion. And that's why Aaron Rodgers, have you ever heard him say the words, "I'm sorry"? Peter, I don't think I've ever heard those words come out of his mouth.
Yeah, I don't.
And I think the true greats, and there's a narrative thread really that runs through them, at least those that I've profiled, they fear that admitting weakness and mistakes and fault in any context, that could follow them into the competitive arena and hurt them on game day. I really believe that. So just him admitting that he made a mistake, really, which was the biggest public relations mistake of his career, I was surprised by that. I appreciated the candor. And frankly, even when he met his dad at Lake Tahoe for the emotional hug last summer, I didn't know if he'd even confirm that. Like, his father told me about it and gave me quotes on the record, but I thought Aaron might say, well, I don't want to get into the family stuff. And I had no idea he was going to confirm that story, add to it, and give me his thoughts that day, and also give me some thoughts on the record about the estrangement. There's a quote in there which really has been underplayed in the last few days about, if you look at the situation with my family, it's like playing a game of poker. If you're holding the cards, you don't have to bluff. And basically, you have my family making up stories, but look at the facts. I thought that was a very strong quote, which really hasn't been pulled out that much.
Yeah.
And so I think that meeting confirmed what I thought about him, but he took it to another level, his candor. He is a fearless public speaker, and it's a commendable trait, even if you disagree with a lot of what he says.
Yeah, he will never not be an interesting figure in the NFL. I think post-career, we're going to continue to see him be a fascinating figure off the field as well. Ian, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk to you again soon.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Peter.
All right, we're going to be live on Sunday night after the game. We'll be live on YouTube. That show will go in your feed. It will be up Monday morning. It will be the Monday podcast, but we'll be live on YouTube if you want a little, sneak preview to all of that. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you find podcasts, and subscribe on all the social medias, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all the good ones, Facebook, so you can stay locked on Packers.